Okay, so we're continuing our conversation here on the afterlife. Now, in order to continue the conversation on the afterlife, we have to, when talking about the soul's journey and the afterlife, one of the issues is the fact that many people, or for many people, the notion of an afterlife empowers them to be more conscious, empowers them to be more compassionate, more sympathetic in this world. And the Torah, by definition, means both wisdom as it caters to the mind and the intellect, as well as the experience of the Torah itself comes from the root. The Torah comes from the root hora'ah, which means a life lesson. So the wisdom of the Torah incorporates the totality of our being to include both the mind and the heart, trickling down to our actions. So Torah's knowledge is not simply designed to enlighten or entertain the mind, offering more information, like the word education comes from the word edukara, to convey a message. It's not trying to convey a message. Rather, what it wants to do is allow us to understand something, inspire the heart, and then when we understand and our heart is inspired, then all of our actions, everything we do, is aligned with our thoughts and our feelings. The result of this is a persuasive and a quite compelling motive to explore the afterlife, and that its wisdom can be harnessed as a productive tool in navigating our day-to-day life. We've said this before, but I'll say it again, that our discussions on the afterlife are not in order for us to find a better afterlife, but rather to find a better life. And they're not brain games, not entertainment, but rather a form of life-altering knowledge, that the realization that actions taken within a three-dimensional universe can exert influence on more subtle planes of existence, and that events in the present in our lives can have consequences and can have repercussions throughout all of eternity. And this thought can empower a person to be more thoughtful and to be more intentional in their behavior in the present moment. So not thinking about what I'm going to do is going to allow me to get a better afterlife, but rather what I'm doing is allowing me to live a better life. Now, part of this discourse of life necessitates that at least we include mortality, even if it's not necessarily the afterlife, into any real existential discussion. Death is a part of life as much as its culmination. So to speak of life when ignoring mortality is incomplete, because death is an inseparable element of life. It's as important as living itself. So for some, the conversation concludes with mortality. But for many, especially those of us that are sitting here in the class, that conclusion is unsatisfactory. For some, to live life fully, to learn how to navigate our way, demands a degree of what will happen and what we'll understand in the future. And this knowledge allows us in our present state to be less fearful, to be more open, to be less ridden by anxiety and more attuned to love and to be more embracing in the moment. Now, there are those who are more, let's say, they're more philosophically inclined, and they suggest that faith is a derivative of fear. These are people who suggest this. So this position that faith is a derivative of fear, what it says is that ultimately religion is developed as a collective response to humanity's fear of death, which probably is why you'll find that many religions are so death-focused. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. Even though we're having this discussion about the afterlife, Judaism is very far from death-focused. As one philosopher once put it, that religion is a necessary invention to create happy endings to miserable lives. Yet, what these thinkers don't know or care to realize is that if you look in the 5 books of Moses, if you look in the Torah, you will not see any explicit reference to an afterlife at all. Actually, there's very few discussions or even conversations about death at all. And so the belief in the afterlife is actually part of the oral tradition. Now, if it's part of the oral tradition, it means that it's encoded throughout the Torah, because the oral tradition doesn't come from nowhere. It gets its source from the written Torah, from the 5 books of Moses. Yet, as far as the written Torah is concerned, the afterlife is not blatantly mentioned anywhere. So, in my opinion, it's because to bring out this point that it's about life and not about afterlife. Because if it was explicitly mentioned, and believe me, there's a lot of things there that are explicitly mentioned, and we can have a conversation about that. But the point is that this conversation about the afterlife is not explicitly mentioned there. And the reason why it's not explicitly mentioned there is because it is not one that we should focus on to the point of where somebody said that fear is a derivative of that faith is a derivative of fear. One of the many reasons that is offered for this omission of the afterlife in the Torah is that the main objective of the Torah is to live in the present moment, as opposed to some theoretical past or some theoretical future. The Torah's aspiration is to imbue us all with a consciousness that is beyond fear, so we can approach life with love. So we can approach life with an openness, with a harmony, and we're able to make life more possible when, or the quality of our life more possible, when we shift our awareness in order to see creation as a God, as God views creation. If you take a look at the way the Torah describes creation, is it says, and God saw all that had been created, and behold, it was very good. Now, just focus on that for a moment. This is a verse from Genesis, from Bereshit 1:31, that God saw all that had been created, and behold, it was very good. Not that we live in a miserable existence, not that we live in a miserable life, not that this world is terrible. No, that God created this world and everything in it, especially you and me, was very good, is very good. So through a gradual experiential process, through understanding the teachings of the Torah, a radical worldview comes into focus. Because if the world that once seemed like a cruel, unforgiving, unfriendly, indifferent place, a thread of warm light begins to seep in, instilling a reality, the reality of our lives with goodness, with optimism, with positive affirmation, and bringing a sense of purpose and meaning, and then ultimate destiny. So what we're trying to say here, and what is the main point of our discussion, is that life is beautiful. That life in this realm of existence is beautiful. And all we need to do is open our eyes. The Talmud tells this obscure story. It says that once Rabbi Eliezer was quite ill, and he was distraught. So Rabbi Yochanan came to pay him a visit. Finding Rabbi Eliezer sitting in darkness and crying, he says to him, Rabbi, why are you crying? Is it because you haven't sufficiently innovated in the realm of Torah? Is it because you don't know what we have learned? All are equal, he says. Those who have attained more and those who have attained less, as long as their hearts are directed towards heaven. Is it because you lack material sustenance? I'm sure you understand that not all people possess both tables of wisdom and prosperity. So why are you crying? I lament, Rabbi Eliezer responded. It's an existential fashion. He says, for all the beauty that will one day be swallowed up in the dust of the earth. Now, this is a very complicated story, because what we're talking about here is not the world of which, the world that we see, the way we see it. We're talking about a world that maybe is seen differently. And in our world, the story of Rabbi Eliezer, seeing the beauty that will one day be swallowed up in the dust of the earth, well, it seems very pessimistic. That's not the point of living. That's not the point of existing. That's not the point of being in this world. Who's having a discussion or a conversation about life that's one day going to be swallowed up in dust and earth? The awareness of life at its core is beautiful. In its original state of creation, And it needs to be celebrated as a beautiful world, as a beautiful life. And that same celebration that we have for life today, for our lives, is applicable to the future and to the afterlife. According to the Torah, all of existence is rooted in divine goodness. So all of existence is good. Every moment is good, whether it's in this life or it's in the next. And so just as we're encouraged to participate with openness, with joy in the life that we have now, part of this positive admission is functioning fearlessly and deeply understanding that what is going to be in the future is also good. I think an eloquent way to phrase this perspective is found in the final words of the great 19th century Hasidic Rebbe, Rabbi Yisrael Yitzchak of Alexander. He says, it was good, it is good, and it will be good. It was good, it is good, and it will be good. A world of infinite goodness can be appreciated even while being embodied within a physical form. So when a human being lives fully and is entirely in sync with the goodness and the divine spark within, the outer world will reflect the inner, and they're going to experience the world that's bathed in light, that's bathed in positivity. And the future transcendent existence merges with the present and transforms life today in the most beautiful way, having the most beautiful experiences, adjusting to such a paradigm. What it does is it allows us to see the beauty, to see the joy, to see the greatness in all the simplicity. A poet once said, the world is a grain of sand and the heaven is a wild flower. And what we'll come to see is that the earth crammed with heaven, and every common bush is afire with God. See, in this conversation, which I think perhaps is a difficult conversation, because in our lives, it looks like everything is in turmoil, especially in the world that we live in today. Somehow we've become predisposed towards a negativity bias. And that negativity bias in our lives says, look around, Rabbi, don't you see what's happening? Don't you see all the crazy things that are going on? This world doesn't make any sense. That's the negativity bias that we're predisposed to. The positivity bias says, you see so little. You think you see. You think that everything you see is what your eyes are focused on. That's all you can see. Believe me, there's a lot more going on in the world than what you can see. There's a lot more going on with what you see than what you can see. Because what you think you see is not exactly what you're seeing. And so, yes, we could live with a certain sense of fear. Yes, we can live with those kinds of challenges. Or we can choose, the right word is not to ignore, because we're not ignoring them. we can choose to look at them differently. We can choose to look at the challenges in our lives through a lens that's predisposed to say that God saw what he created, and behold, it was very good. So every experience that we have, every challenge we have, behold, it is very good. Oh, you don't see it as very good? Okay, because you don't see everything. I know. I don't see everything. I know, but it's good. Not only is the challenge good, but the outcome is good. Questions, thoughts before I continue?
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Hi, Sagi. My name is Sagi.
Hi, Sagi. Welcome.
Thank you. I hear you, what you're saying, but sometimes there are situations in life that are very difficult to adopt this kind of attitude, especially when, let's say, something bad happens to a child. Let's say, God forbid, a 5-year-old with cancer. How can you see the good in something like that? How can you tell yourself, this is good?
You know what's amazing, Sagi? I'll tell you something amazing. I hear these kinds of questions a lot, but I don't ever hear them from the person who's experiencing them. I've had many opportunities as a rabbi. Unfortunately, I've met a 5-year-old with cancer. The 5-year-old with cancer never asked this existential question. It's us. We are asking these questions. And I'm not saying they're wrong to ask. They're right to ask. Elie Wiesel once had a conversation with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And it was a fascinating conversation. Both Holocaust survivors. Today is Yom HaShoah, so it's only proper that we mention the Holocaust and remembering, though the world today is remembering 6 million, I can't picture or fathom 6 million. And I find that the conversation of the Holocaust and the Shoah gets lost in 6 million because it's just too vast, too much. But I can focus on one. And I think that today, I'm just digressing here for a moment, but today it's so important that we focus on one, to remember an individual who perished in the Holocaust and in the Shoah, and learn about them, and be able to do a mitzvah, and be able to live and remember them as if we're remembering our own family member. And if we have a family member that perished in the Shoah, then we should remember that family member. If we don't, we should adopt someone, light a candle for them, say a prayer for them, and remember that person who no one's remembering. You can go online and you can get lists and lists of people and their stories, people who died and perished in the Holocaust. And so 2 Holocaust survivors were talking. And the one survivor, Elie Wiesel, turns to the Rebbe and says, how can you believe in God? How can you believe in a good God that does terrible things to people? How can a good God create such a terrible, terrible world? The Rebbe smiles and he says to him, we've become accustomed in our lives that every question deserves an answer. But sometimes answers destroy questions. And if an answer destroys a question, we don't answer it, but we ask it over and over and over again. So I'm not denying the question, Sagi. I'm saying is that these are the questions that we ask over and over and over again. And the moment we get an answer to them, well, there's not an answer. I guarantee you, there's not an answer in the world, at least for me, that would answer the Holocaust for me. There's not an answer in the world. You can give me any answer you want, and it's not going to be satisfactory. So therefore, I would consider that, and I believe that we would all consider that, a question that cannot be answered. But it's a question that we're going to continue to ask, because the moment we stop asking it, we forget it. The world needs to ask these questions. And it's not only the Holocaust, it's like you said, the 5-year-old with cancer, or other things that are going on, atrocities in Ukraine or in other places that are happening right now as we speak. We're not denying the realities of our world. We're just choosing that if there's something I can do to change it, I'm going to change it. If there's something I can do to affect it, I'm going to affect it. But if there's nothing that I can do to affect it, and all it's going to do is bring me down and make me depressed, well, that's not the point of it. Something that's going to bring me down, something that's not going to uplift me, then we question it. And question it so we can remember it, so we don't repeat it, so the world doesn't repeat it. But we never answer it, because if we answer it, we destroy the question. And who would ever want to destroy a question like that? You follow, Sagi?
Yeah, I'm following you.
Jill.
So I got a little tripped up earlier, and this might be just totally beyond my understanding. You said in the Torah, there's no reference to the afterlife. It's from the oral tradition, which is, and I don't remember what you said, that it's either informed from the after, like I don't understand how, if it's not in the Torah, where did it come from? It feels like it could be this giant game of telephone that has been transposed by humans down the line. So I kind of got a little stuck there. How did we get that?
Okay,
info?
so let me give you a little background on this.
Mhm.
So when the Torah was written by Moses, most of it was written by Moses. At the same time, the Torah was received at Sinai by the Jewish people. There were 600,000 freed slaves that were there. It happened 50 days after their freedom from Egypt. And actually right now, today is day 12, and we actually count every single day. From every year we do this. From the day they left Egypt until going to Sinai and receiving the Torah, we will count. We're now at day 12 of 50. And day 50 is going to be the festival of Shavuot, which is a day that we commemorate, that we relive the giving of a Torah every single year. And it's a festival. So this is something that is very real in our lives on an annual basis. That's happening right now.
Mhm.
When the Torah was given, there was that which was written and that which was spoken, what we call the oral tradition. It was all given by Moses.
Spoken by God to Moses? Is
That's
that
right. That's right.
okay? Thank you.
It was all given to Moses at Sinai, but part was written, part was spoken. That was passed down in a proper traditional way, and it's fascinating. I'll give you an example of how powerful is the tradition and the transmission of the oral law. The tradition at that time was when you would teach it, you would have to teach it 100 times. But most teachers would teach it 101 times because it was beyond it was one time beyond what was the norm. So if you were teaching the oral tradition during that time, you had to teach that teaching 100 times before it was considered a teaching. How many things in your life you've gone over 100 times? 100 times. It's a lot of times. A lot. I could think of, okay, if it's really interesting to me, I'll do it twice, 3 times. I can't think of how many things I've learned or listened to 4 times, 5 times. I'm talking about 100 times. That was normal. 100 times. And obviously there's a reason for that, is that the teaching from Moses had to be a pure teaching. Now, if you were going to be the person who was going to teach the next generation that pure teaching, you had to teach it in its absolute form. 100 times would guarantee that you would know it word for word by heart. So that it wouldn't be a game of broken telephone. Now, at some point, a couple hundred years after the Torah was given, when this process, and I'm only giving you one part of the process of oral transmission. There's many parts of the process. There's actually a list of 29 different processes in order to transmit the oral tradition from teacher to student. It's a fascinating educational thesis of how to transmit the oral tradition, because it wasn't written down. But at some point, there was a great rabbi, his name was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and he was a very wealthy man, also a great scholar, and he realized that people didn't have that time anymore. It was getting to a point where people didn't have the time to go over every single part 100 times, and it's going to get lost, or at this point, maybe it would become a game of broken telephone, and he didn't want that to happen. And so that is when the oral tradition was written. So the oral tradition that we have today was written starting with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and later Ravina Ravashi, who created the Babylonian Talmud, and many other scholars who then, over the course of a couple hundred years, had written the tradition and many, many other books that followed, and commentaries on those and explanations on those. And the great 500 years ago, there was the great Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, who was known as Rashi, who was the great biblical commentator and the great Talmudic commentator, who lived in France in the 15th century. I mean, even before that, there was the great codifier, Maimonides, the Rambam, who lived 1,000 years ago. So there's been a process to that. Now that I gave you all that background, in the written law, there is no explicit reference to the afterlife. It all comes from the oral law. It all comes from the oral tradition. Now, it is alluded to in the written law. Obviously, they can't get it from nowhere, because everything in the oral tradition will have a source in the written, but not explicit.
Okay.
Did that answer your question in 2 minutes or less?
It did, actually. Thank you. I appreciate it.
No problem. Any other questions? Okay, look at that. All good, but we're here. I'm going to go into one other. I think we have 20 minutes now, so I'm going to go into one other element. And this element is probably, I won't be able to finish it today. I'll have to finish it next week. But the body as self, right? When we're talking about the afterlife, we have to have a conversation about the body as self. Who are we? What constitutes our beingness? And I think this is the most essential of all existential issues. Who am I? What makes me be? I don't know if there's a theologist or a philosopher who hasn't asked this profound question. Now, in order to begin to discover who we are on a Kabbalistic level, especially in reference to the afterlife, we have to start by examining that which is most apparent and that which is most manifest, which is our body. You can't ask the question, who am I in this world, without first discussing the body. To many people, the physical aspect of self is a primary component of their self-evaluation, of their sense of value. The more beautiful their bodies appear, the more confident they are. They defined their self-worth based on their bodies. It's very Greek. There's a couple things that we have left from the great Greek Empire. One of them being the focus on the body, and the second being the horoscope. But that's about it that I know of. But that focus on the body is something that the Greeks did better than anyone else. But it becomes, and people say, it's a self-confidence and self-worth. I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago, and they said, oh, you realize that you don't have hair on the top of your head. There's ways of growing hair. You can be more confident. Like, it's okay. However God made me, I'll be okay. If God wants me to have no hair in my head and then put it all in my face, happy birthday. I'm good with that. So what is the body? Because our world is so focused on the body, gyms and products, and I mean, it's endless in our world today, what the focus on the body is. The body, I think, in its widest definition, it can be viewed as a collection of cells working in harmony to form a larger unit that we call the body. So, simply put, the body is nothing more than a grand total of some 150 pounds of protoplasm that we can see, we can feel, we can touch, and we can maneuver as we desire. But on an existential level, is this the real you? Is this who you really are? 100 and whatever pounds of bluff? Towards which body part can you point and accurately say that if you lose that physical property, you'll become less of who you are? Say, heaven forbid, a person loses a limb. Heaven forbid, no one should know of this, a hand or a foot, for example. Does that person become less of who they are or less of who they were prior to the injury? One of the great things that the Paralympics brought out is that when we're missing one part, other parts become more enhanced to the point where we can have a Paralympics. No one's going to say that, heaven forbid, someone who's missing an arm or a leg is less of a person. So what makes the real you? If you're not defined by your arms and you're not defined by your legs or your toes or your fingers, then why assume that you are the sum total of all these individual fragments? Okay, for argument's sake, you can still insist that we are the sum total of all the parts of the body. Individually, the body is seen as an assemblage of loose parts. But as one cohesive unit, to become you or to become an I, to counter this line of reasoning, we have to contemplate on the fact that the substance of every human's body, even a healthy, robust body, is constantly being replaced and regenerated. At a subnuclear level, the elements that make up our atoms are perpetually being annihilated and recreated. So actually, we're never the same body. We're not even the same body as we were a moment ago. And as odd as it may seem, 98% of the atoms in your body were not there a year ago. Your skin, for instance, is renewed every month. Your stomach lining every 4 days. And the surface cells that actually come in contact with food every 5 minutes. So being that the body is ceaselessly being regenerated, it would seem peculiar to acquire a sense of identity, a sense of selfhood from that which is in constant flux. The identification of self with the body alone has to be ruled out because it's constantly changing. It's constantly being regenerated. The body, material as it is changing by its very nature, constantly. And even the brain, which is the storage house of all experiences, which is the storage house of all the knowledge, is going to be and is in a state of continual flux. So the challenge becomes to discover that which is lasting, that which is permanent, that which is unchangeable, to find that which exists as the background and also as the thread that runs through all of life, the thing or the self that experiences all the various changes of life. So think about this for a moment. I'm not going to be able to answer it today, so you'll have to think about it for the next week. What is that which was you when you were 8 years old and is still you right now? Think of something that was you at 8 and is still the same you now. And I'll go a step further. Based on the fact that we can feel and we're aware of the sensations of our body, we arrive at the greatest confirmation that we are, in fact, not our body, because that which can be felt is not by definition the feeler, as that which can be observed is not by definition the observer. We cannot be that which we are conscious of. You cannot feel and be felt. You cannot be the observer and the observed. You cannot be that which you are conscious of. So when observing some object or thinking of it, you cannot be that object because you're separate from it. So if you think about your body, it means that something separate from your body is doing that thinking. So now that we've established that our bodies are part of us, who are we? And it's so important. If you want to understand the afterlife, if you want to understand life, at some point, we have to ask this question, as difficult as it is. And we have to follow this train of thought, as difficult as it is. because we'll never become the know, the knower, and the known. That's beyond us. So before I take your questions and your comments, what I want to leave you with today is a question that has challenged some of the greatest psychologists, some of the greatest philosophers throughout the generations. And that is, what is I? What is self? What is something that was I, that was you at the age of 8, and it's still you right now? Who am I really? Alexandra, tell me.
Our bodies are part of us today on this earth, but they're only an envelope, and we're not
That's right.
supposed to get attached to it, even though it does create us some challenges at times, which do make us grow as well. So they're part of the experience that we need to have now. But I've been removed fallopian tube. It's still me. I've been removed my gallbladder. It's still me. It's part of who I am, but it doesn't define me at 47. It may have defined me at 16. So I would say that personally, my constant, it's the spark inside. At 47, I can say that I do find that spark that maybe I had already at 8. And if I remember observing Naomi, and now she's almost 12, and so she's a bit more educated is not the word, but she's been raised. Okay, so we have given her some filters. But when that one was 2, they say the terrible 2s, but goodness, the personality.
Mhm.
And while she's been filtered, she doesn't scratch and bite and pull your hair anymore. She still has that spark in her personality. She's still in there, except our job as parents and living in this world is that we have to teach her behaviors and circumstances, etc. But that, what makes her is still in there.
To build on what you're saying, which is very powerful, this idea of the spark. Something, and I don't want an answer now. I want you to think about this. Would you rather be the spark that is within the 12-year-old or be the spark that's within the 47-year-old? Don't answer it.
I think it's pretty much the same.
Well, think about it.
I'll think about it. It's an excellent question. Because sometimes I have to say that now I'm in a very different place of where I was 3 years ago. Under every aspect, my life has changed, my environment has changed, and obviously it has a positive effect on me, thank God. But I do remember looking at pictures of me at the time and looking at pictures of me at 20. And I asked, where did the light go? I'm sorry. The light in the eyes, where did it go? So would I rather be there or here? I'm happy here today. My answer would have been different 3 years ago.
It's very powerful. And as we constantly change, your answer may be different in 3 years. And that's okay. That's the beauty of life. Thank you.
It is.
Yeah, thank you for that share.
Sorry for crying. I'm not sorry for crying.
No reason to be sorry for crying. In this open space, you can cry as much as you want. Cheryl.
Thank you.
I think I have a few years, possibly decades on some of you. And I think probably 30 years ago or 40 years ago, yeah, I think a lot of things were tied into your looks. And you would think that you could get a better job or you could do something different with your life based on your physical, whether it's marriage, finding a partner, whatever, all that. And before I was 40, I got a diagnosis of an autoimmune disease that now has really progressed in the last year. I'm having lung troubles. I'm having all kinds of physical disabilities of walking, of breathing, of stomach issues, all kinds of stuff. My focus has now had to become the spiritual and the wisdom and the knowledge that I gain in classes like this and others. So I've now transformed that physical that I placed so much emphasis on. I used to be a singer in a group. I had lots of different activities that I just can't do anymore. So I can't define myself by what I used to do. I now understand I need to define by my personality and my wisdom and what I can contribute to others. And I thank you for the reminder that you started with early on about the physical body and that we are not just the physical body. And that made me relax a little bit in my seat to just think, I need to not look ahead that I'm going to die tomorrow of something, but to really appreciate today and do the best I can and be a better me today. So thank you for making me more aware again. I forget. A lot of us forget. We're all aware that we want to live our best lives, but we have this selective amnesia somehow that comes about. And I need those reminders. And it made me feel better sitting in my chair. My back didn't feel so bad. My shoulders were okay. I mean, I felt relaxed in the fact that I could just be here and not think about what tomorrow is going to bring. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. And I think it's something to remember when you're having those moments where things are difficult, how easy it is for you just to refocus yourself and say it's not about the body. Just refocus yourself. Shana.
Meditation class that in a meditation class that I had taken before, that very question of who am I came up over and over. And people would say, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, I'm a doctor, I'm a blah, blah, blah. But that really doesn't define who you are, just as Alessandra said, the spark. It doesn't define, it just says what other people think you are, and it's a part of your whole. But who are we? That question is the best question. Who am I? And if I didn't have a husband, then I couldn't be a wife. And if I didn't have a brother or sister, then I couldn't be a sister. So if I take all that stuff away, who am I? Do I not have an essence other than defined by somebody or something else?
Yes. Yes. Shana. Good to see you. We can't hear you. So,
Hello?
yeah, there you are.
Okay, hello, Rabbi Granat, everybody. My name is Shana Saper, and it's my first time coming to your class. And I am so grateful that I came to your class today. Thank you for this excellent excellent learning. And I'm saying, everybody who's spoken today, including not just you, Rabbi Bernath, but everyone has contributed so much to this discussion. And I'll be thinking about it a lot. And I have a thought, a question. It comes from the beginning, the earlier part of your talk, about the world in its creation being good. And as I've understood it, that the bad in the world is pretty much our doing. People have messed up, and so we can't say that the world in its creation was bad, but that we have made it so. And at the same time, and this is where I'm confused, we're the creation. We're part of the creation that God made. And so here we are with this potential of good and bad. We have it, it's built into us somehow. And then everything we are is also a reflection of Hashem. So my question is, how is it that there is bad as part of the creation and we're part of it? So that's my question. Is that a question, or is that just a?
If I'd like to point you in the direction of my favorite podcast. It's called Honestly with Barry Weiss. If you don't listen to it, definitely you should listen to it. The episode that she produced this week answers this question. She had an amazing economist and social psychologist on her podcast, and one of the things he said, I'm not going to take away, I mean, it's an hour conversation that she had with him, but one of the things he said is that even a baby will focus more on a frown face than a happy face. That we are there is something within our psyche from early on that focuses on the negative. Look at all the rubbernecking that goes on the highway if there's an accident. They're not looking at he said this, they're not looking at the flower bed across the way. No one's focusing on that flower bed, on the beautiful flowers. They're focusing on the accident. And I think that in life, there is a choice that we have at all times. And there's many choices that we have at all times, but one of the incredible choices that we have in life is the choice to choose what we focus on and how we focus on it. Mm-hmm. And we are, and I said this before, conditioned with a negativity bias. And the Rebbe, taught me to be reconditioned towards a positivity bias. And I have a long way to go before I can be reconditioned, but I try every day to refocus myself and see things through the positive instead of the negative. And it's hard. It's really hard because of the social conditioning and how the world is just everyone's rubbernecking towards the accident on the highway. And that's why there was traffic. And that analogy just plays itself right through so many other parts of our lives.
It seems it's our challenge then to.
It could be one of the great challenges of our generation, a collective challenge. There are not only individual challenges, there are also collective challenge. And I would have to agree with you, Shana, that one of the collective challenges of our generation is to focus on the positive instead of the negative. And it's something that we may have to do consciously over and over again, many times a day, because of the conditioning and the bias towards the negative. Just think about the fact that bias is actually considered negative. There's no such thing as a positivity bias. It's a negative bias. It's a negativity bias that there is. It's fascinating that that's how strong, even within the words that we use, there's a bias. So thank you for that. I usually go around the room and get everyone's takeaways. I know that we're running a little late, and we have another class that we start right after this. Some people are waiting for, but I'd love to just go, and if in just a few words, if everybody can just give, what are you taking home with you today? I would love to hear, especially since we had such a deep and meaningful conversation today. Alessandra, do you want to start?
Sorry, technical challenges. I don't think I have much more to say today, but I read an interesting comment on Facebook. Somebody was making a video of something happening on the street, and somebody commented, you know that on your phone you don't just have a camera, you have actually a phone to call the police. So thinking about what you just said, and Shana's comment about the bad and the good, we all have a choice to take action, so we observe the bad, and our job is to bring the good into it. So, and just clicked with the, you don't just have a camera on your phone, you also have a phone on it. So,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
that's my final note, and thank you for today's class.
Thank you, Alessandra. Jill, what are you taking home?
I think the last thing you just said, sparked by Shayna's comment of like, what are we focusing on? And to continue to consciously work at where we want our focus to be. So that's what I'm taking away. Thank you.
Thank you. Jen, what about you?
Oh my gosh, there's so much. One thing that I've been thinking about is I was listening to some audiobooks on like very, very elementary astrophysics, and they were saying that in the universe, there's a slightly more, I'm going to butcher this. This is beyond my scientific reading level, but in the universe, there's slightly more positive or matter that exists than dark energy or dark matter. And it has to be that way. Otherwise, the universe would just not exist. So there's that.
Thank you. Thank you. Sagi, what's your takeaway?
I think the question, who am I? I mean, I've been studying Kabbalah for some time, and I know the answers that are written in the books, but really to take a deep thought of who am I really? And sometimes I get confused between who am I and who I want to be. What do I think? What do I think that I should be? Focus on that, and just try to focus on the fact that I'm here is good by itself. I don't need to be somebody. I'm here because God put me here, and there's a reason for that, and not necessarily have to find a destination or build a destination for myself.
Thank you. That's amazing. Cheryl?
I pretty much said what I needed to say. I thank you so much for your wisdom, and welcome to the new people here. It's a wonderful, wonderful group. So welcome.
Thank you, Cheryl. And Celeste?
What a powerful class today. Incredible. Thank you so much. Rabbi, it was exactly what I was needing to hear today. And I really want to thank everyone who shared, Alessandra and Cheryl. I relate very much to what you both shared, this idea of being deconstructed sometimes physically due to things beyond our control. And there's that pivot point, a choice of how we move forward in reconstructing our attitudes around the new body we may be in. So I learned a lot from all the sharing today. And Rabbi, thank you so much for leading the class.
You're welcome. And Kelsey?
Hey, well, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I feel like I've really been experiencing it in my life, which has been wonderful and a wonderful new perspective. And so today just, I think, gave me more depth to focus on and just really focus on the good in the moment. And then that makes everything good. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Shana, do you have a takeaway or you already said yours?
Well, I'm thinking about the question of who I was when I was 8 years old and who I am today. And I've always noticed that, when you look at a picture of somebody when they were a baby and the way they are now, I mean, it's just a picture, right? It's just the physical, but there's something that's striking about, you recognize them. And I think what I recognize is something in the eyes.
Mm.
And it's not the color, it's not the shape.
Mm.
It's some kind of intangible, an expression. Something is there from the beginning to the end of one's life. So
The eyes, the window to the soul. Mm. That's a really good takeaway. I'd like to
thank you very much, Rabbi Bruno.
My pleasure, and looking forward to seeing everyone next week. And I also want to remind you that you're invited to join me Monday night for this new course on the Kabbalah of the Hebrew letters. That's going to be a 5-week starting Monday night. And on Thursday night next week, we're starting a meditation, a mindfulness course. And so I'd like everybody to come. There's a small cost for it, but if you don't have to pay it, you can just let me know, and I'm happy to send you all of the links so you can join either of those courses. The Kabbalah of the Hebrew letters is a brand new course that I'm in the process of creating, and Celeste has been helping me put together some of the material, designing some of the material, so she can give you an idea. It's probably not what you're expecting, as a lot of my new courses have been, but I think a lot of you have asked for it, and I'm hoping that over the course of the 5 weeks, I can really enlighten you at the beauty of just the Hebrew letters themselves and what they mean Kabbalistically and what they mean for our lives. So that's the story. And we're going to move on to Talmud now, for those of you who are continuing at the Talmud class. But if you're going, good to see you, and hope to see you next week. And great to be back. Great to be back together.
So good to see everybody again. It's really great. Missed
I
everybody.
agree.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye, everyone.